Hey, what's going on? So, Antifa. About 4 months ago, I had made a video talking about Antifa from a thread, a Reddit thread that I had saw being passed around Twitter about how they wanted to up the ante, if you will, become better trained and arm themselves. At the time, they were talking about escalating their weapons to literal firearms. And since then, while Antifa, the black bloc, masked thugs that go to the protests and attack people, they themselves haven't armed themselves with firearms. We had seen the rise of the John Brown clubs, which are essentially like communist gun clubs. Antifa allies, communist allies who are essentially militias, gun clubs. So while Antifa hasn't taken guns out to protests, luckily, because who knows what these idiots would do if they did, they certainly have upped the violence. Way back, even before I made my original Antifa video 4 months ago, we saw at the inaugurations, they were basically smashing windows, lighting garbage cans on fire, maybe smashing car windows, lighting those on fire. But their physical attacks were few and far between at that point. Now, compare and contrast that to current rallies, where they're attacking, they swarm on people in mobs, and they'll surround you and they'll kick you and hit you with sticks. So Antifa has certainly upped the violence in the last 4 months since I made my correctly predicting video. Now, what do we do about Antifa? I understand we have freedom of speech in this country, right? That's basically what, this is the only country left, or well, maybe ever, that truly had freedom of speech, the right to free assembly, which we can see is being eroded in this country. It seems to be eroded more for people on the right, the ones who are not being violent unless it's in self-defense. It's being eroded by the left, by government with hate speech sort of laws, which hate speech is ridiculous. It's not a real thing. It's very recent. Then big tech, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, silencing people who have opinions different than theirs. People on the right, people in the alt-right. Anybody, you barely have to be further to the right. You can be someone classical liberal, a Dave Rubin type, are getting censored on YouTube, at least demonetized. So the attack of free speech to those on the right is growing on a daily basis. My question is, how far do we let Antifa go? It's one thing to have a counter protest, to show up to a free speech rally and yell and scream and make horn sounds and things like that. It's a complete other thing when you start attacking people, literally, physically attacking them, spraying them with mace or worse, acids, any kind of chemicals that can burn the eyes, permanent damage, attacking people again in mobs with sticks and bats, throwing bottles filled with concrete or urine at people. This goes beyond the limits of the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly. This is tantamount to yelling fire in a crowded theater. You are causing physical harm. Now, what we've seen recently after Charlottesville, the left, a lot of politicians, they were actually condoning the actions of Antifa. They were saying, well, they're fighting against hate. They're fighting evil, and it's okay to fight evil and to punch Nazis. You know, you had CNN, you had MSNBC, you had all the left-wing media. You had Mitt Romney, Marco Rubio, Paul Ryan coming out and saying, well, you know, violence is bad, but they're fighting hate and they're fighting evil. You can't condemn someone for fighting evil. And, you know, only until like really recently when Nancy Pelosi came out and condemned Antifa, which I'm sure is just a strictly political move. I seriously doubt that Nancy Pelosi actually condemns Antifa. I believe it's a purely political strategic move. But since then, you've seen some from the alt-left media, Joe Scarborough and that Mika chick. They've denounced Antifa, calling them fascists. You might have seen Paul Ryan backtrack some of his comments where he was condoning their actions and now starting to condemn them only because Nancy Pelosi came out and did it first. So how would he look when you have a pretty far left Democrat condemning Antifa and he's still not? I mean, he had to. Again, it's only political. I doubt that they believe what they're saying when they condemn Antifa. Now, I understand, like I said, America is the last bastion of free speech in the world. And like I also said, we are losing it here. But how far do we allow Antifa to go with free speech? How far do we allow communism to go with free speech in this country? They are obviously anti-American. Obviously. And up until, you know, recently, I say like within this decade, they were a very minor fringe element, very non-vocal, but things have changed. I mean, you can see the growth of the Antifa numbers, the far left, the media, the big tech companies, they're all join in support with this sort of communist idea. Anti-free speech, anti-freedom, anti-American, pro-violence, tearing down American monuments, whatever you believe that their historical value is, they're still American monuments, flags. How far do they go? Now, they're already talking about Thomas Jefferson's and George Washington's. When do we tear apart? When do we shred up the Constitution? I mean, the Constitution was written by these people, by slave owners. So if we're going to take down Confederate statues and we're going to deface Thomas Jefferson statues and Abraham Lincoln statues, how far do we go before one of these leftist communist individuals call for the shredding of the Constitution, of the document that basically enshrines the values of American rights? How far do we allow these communists to go in this country? I say we squash communism. I say we put an end to this. Damn their free speech. You don't get free speech when you yell fire in a theater. You don't get free speech when you put masks on and you attack people in mobs, when you surround them and kick them and beat them and throw concrete at them and smash people with sticks and spray mace in their eyes. You lose your sense, your free speech. It's non-existence anymore. This isn't free speech. This is violent, radical action. There has to be an end to this. There has to be a stop to this. How far do we allow this to go before it goes too far? Like I said, hate crimes, tearing statues down, tearing flags down, removing the national anthem in school, removing the Pledge of Allegiance in school, while replacing it with Muslim prayer rooms. These are all anti-American actions. When do we say enough is enough? Freedom of speech, while it's meant to be inflammatory, it's not meant to be violent. It's not meant to be, you're not supposed to use it to tear apart the nation in which you are allowed to have this free speech. I think we've crossed the line here. I think there has to be a serious discussion on how far people, groups like Antifa, like these radical communist groups, are allowed to go. You give them an inch and they want it all. Where does it stop? When they start knocking down government buildings? When they start shredding the Constitution? And then when we say, whoa, 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 what's going on? Then there's nothing to support our legal rights anymore because they just shredded the Constitution? Like, how far do we allow this to go? I think it needs to stop now. If you are causing violence, you need to be stopped. If your movement is shutting down anybody who's trying to use freedom of speech to express a thought or an idea, and you're coming with violence, with physical property damage. See, here's the thing. In the eyes of Antifa, in the eyes of Marxist communists, destroying property isn't violence because property was gained via violence. You understand their thinking? The way these people think is that if you have private property, you are inherently causing violence on people who do not have private property, or that you somehow stole this property by systemic racism or systemic oppression. So it's okay to destroy private property because it is in itself violence. Do you understand the thinking that these people have? This is not freedom of speech. This goes way beyond freedom of speech. If they label you a Nazi and they say Nazis are violent and it's okay to punch a Nazi, but then they label anyone that they disagree with a Nazi, that means anyone can be punched, can be attacked. This is not free speech. This is violent acts. This is acts of terrorism. This is domestic terrorism. This is no longer free speech. If Antifa were a group of people who went to a park and protested the opposite end of a free speech protest, and they stood there with signs and whistles and made noise, that would be free speech. They have the right to protest. But when you start violence, when you start throwing things, we're no longer talking about free speech. They literally, and this may sound hyperbolic to some people, but it's not. They literally want to overthrow this government. They want to tear apart America and replace it with communism. Straight up communism. Bolsheviks, Marxist, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Che Guevara. Communism is responsible for well over 100 million deaths worldwide. Now, usually it's within their own nations, so it doesn't like the Red Terror of communist Russia. The Bolsheviks slaughtered tens of millions of Russians. But because it happened within Russia, I guess we overlook it. I don't know. Communism has been infiltrated in this country probably since the World Wars. Now, it doesn't help that FDR sided with Uncle Joe Stalin in World War II. And I'd say since then, communism has won. Communism has infiltrated our land. It's taken over academia. It's taken over left-wing media, Hollywood. I'd say a good part of our government. I mean, we basically had Democratic Socialist, which was a name used by the communists, Bernie Sanders running for president as an out-and-out socialist. Now, yeah, we've had socialist parties and communist parties before, but, you know, they'd have 20 people voting for them. They don't it doesn't mean anything, right? Before. But now, when you have Bernie Sanders running on a major platform, a major ticket as an outright socialist, and you have these violent Antifa groups literally attacking people on the streets, and then you have left-wing media supporting them, and left-wing politicians supporting them, or at least not condemning them, I say we reached a line, we crossed the line, and it's time to eliminate it. It is time that we got together as a nation and said enough communism in the United States. It has no place in this country. We need to embrace nationalist ideas. We need to embrace our nation again. Whether that means uniting us as a people and restoring our pride, we need to embrace the United States of America and freedom of speech. Not destroy it. Not what Antifa and the communists want to do, which is destroy the United States of America. Now, I said 4 months ago that they were going to up the ante in the violence, that they were going to lead to a new civil war. Now, while we haven't had an outright civil war, battles are growing. You know, it's happening. Charlottesville, the Boston Free Speech Rally, Berkeley again. These spots keep growing, and it's going to happen more and more, and it's going to erupt. And we are going to have to defend ourselves against these thugs, these criminals, these domestic terrorists. So unless you want to see a real civil war go down in this nation, and lots of blood and lots of destruction, we need to decide as a nation that it's time to squash Antifa and the radical left. Communism, socialism have no place in the United States of America. Think about it, folks. I'd love to hear what you got to say. Comment below. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and yeah, that's it. I'm out of here.